Welcome to the DevReady Podcast, where we're helping non-techs build better technology. Today, we're joined by Miriana Taflaga from Symplicit. Miriana, thanks for coming in today.
Oh, you're welcome, Andrew. Thanks for inviting me.
It's a little bit later podcast recording. It's after 6 Melbourne time PM, which generally it is in the morning, so hopefully it's nice and smooth sailing from here.
Oh, the coffee helps.
It does, yeah. It's been a long day in Melbourne. So tell us a bit about yourself and your background.
Great. So I actually have a background in marketing.
Okay.
So I kind of made my way through to the UX, CX space from that, leveraging off that sort of background whereby the focus has always been the customer and value for the customer. So either looking at product design or looking at segmentation or looking at branding, messaging, and then looking at services. So through that, I transitioned across to the world of human-centered design.
What does human-centered design mean for anyone out there?
So human-centered design is basically a practice whereby you design for the human. So central to that is actually always thinking about the customer or the user, irrespective of whether you are designing a solution, looking at a problem space, whether you're looking at designing a service, a product, a space, because we do, at Symplicit, we do spaces as well. So it's actually looking at the lens of whatever sort of innovation or solution you're looking at from a customer or a user or a human point of view. And it's actually looking at it from the customer per se, but sometimes also the employee who's actually delivering the service. So you could actually look at all the touch points. So it's
obviously the journey of the process and what people are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So designers, as one of their foundational sort of skill sets, they would often employ that kind of methodology or thinking about, always designing for the user or the customer in mind. Architects sort of do the same. Landscapers, they're sort of always thinking about how's the user going to use the space, how's the user going to look at that product, how's that product going to be used at different touch points along the customer journey.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, so it's just applying that lens.
When did human-centered design become a thing? So, especially in the technology space, so we're talking about tech.
Oh, definitely, yeah. I think it became a thing when Apple really started designing, those kinds of products. So looking at the way that people actually interact with a device or a technology piece. And a lot of those guys, and potentially females, but I think most of them women, sort of branched out and then coined the term human-centered design. And from that point on, the Stanford Design School out in the States, they started then really building that into various courses. Yes. And then from that point on, IDEO came along, because I think some of those founders worked for Apple. And so they really popularised the whole concept of human-centered design. Through the Stanford design thinking came out of that. And then I guess over the years, design thinking, which is, the thinking practice, has been extended to a whole raft of different business groups. So then you've got, people that might be in service delivery wanting to apply design thinking principles, or in marketing or in operations and that kind of stuff. So it's really, it can be used across the board. So
get it.
Yeah, so it's
so within Symplicit itself. What are your skill sets? What are you offering your customers, and how do you get them from idea to something that's tangible and centered around a customer?
So I guess the offering of Symplicit is, we position ourselves as a innovation consultancy. So we can work with a whole raft of different client groups. So whether they're startups or corporate groups, and anything in between, whether they're government as well, because governments are applying design thinking to a lot of their service delivery, or policy creation as well now. So the kinds of skill sets that we have is a mix of, developers, through to researchers. I'm more of a researcher. And strategy. So looking at, how do you design something, researching for that, and that could be any kind of research. I can talk more about that later. But then we have the traditional sort of UX designers, the UI designers. So experts that look at, how do you actually design wireframes, how do you develop prototypes, how do you actually work alongside developers, so you actually look at what could realistically be produced in the realm of technology, because you can dream up any idea, but whether it's actually viable is another consideration. So we've got those kinds of skill sets. We have interaction designers, so looking at the UI component. So there's a lot of crossover in terms of those skill sets. And then we also look at, different industry experiences in terms of length of service, because you need that kind of mix of deep knowledge in terms of how industry sector works, how different
it's the domain knowledge, you need it, definitely.
So, but then you also need the fresh ideas and that sort of stuff. So it's a mix of different sort of skill sets. I think in our game, the primary consideration is the user or the customer lens. So it's being empathetic. So we employ a lot of people or have consultants or designers that are, they have a range of soft skills. So it's all about the empathy. Listening is a really important skill set. Not being afraid of the unknown, the uncertainty, because as you know, in that development sort of phase, there's a lot of grey.
Yeah, there is. There's a lot of uncertainty. You don't know what you don't know. You're jumping into something off the back of an idea or a concept, and then you're pulling it apart and really evolving it as you go. So there is grey.
Absolutely. So I think this is where human-centered design, we use a whole raft of different definitions which could be used in different industries to mean the same thing. So for us, it's just the practice of, looking at and speaking with the customer and actually understanding their world and then looking at solutions. So, we call it UX design, we can call it human-centered design, customer-led design, UX.
A number of names for it, you're right.
Yeah, that's right. But I think the fundamental underlying principle is that we listen to what the customer wants. And you're right, sometimes the customer may not know what they want, but then it's actually just involving them through the various stages of the project. So you're constantly getting that input. Yeah, so...
And it's about that feedback, because like you said, customers don't always know what they want, need, or even desire, and they're actually going to pay for or use. So you need that continuous feedback as you go into that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think central to that is when we're looking at the problem space, it's actually not... It's actually exploration. It's not being afraid of actually investing the time up front to actually explore, to really test whatever assumptions you have, to uncover those hypotheses that you have and really test that. But it's also pulling things apart and looking at it from totally different angles, so that you don't come up with a solution or an idea and you go gangbusters and you develop something and invest a whole bucket of money and then you realise it's not working. So it's actually thinking time. It's being quite strategic and thinking and investing in understanding the problem space. And by that I mean the early adopters of UX or human-centered design, they spent a lot of time just observing people and how they interact with technologies, or observing people doing the things that they do, and then trying to work out what a solution could potentially be. So I think a lot of that doesn't actually happen, where people aren't looking at the way people are behaving, or asking those questions like why.
And the why will get you to some different answer generally. Surface level starts from there. So when you look at, and you mentioned something interesting there, just monitoring what people are doing. And in the early stages, you might be looking at more of a problem space, which you referred to, defining what those problems are. You might perceive a problem to be X, but maybe it could be Y. And getting into the bottom of that and monitoring people. Interesting point. So how would you go about that if you're sitting in an organisation looking to solve a problem? If you're a startup, you've got an idea and a concept. So what do you do around observation? How could you approach that?
Lots of things. You can actually, there's lots of things you can do. I think the first thing you do is actually you define a problem in the way that you currently understand it.
Okay.
So it's actually just, you got a bit of a North Star. Then what you kind of do is map out all the assumptions that you might have so that you make it really explicit that you might have certain biases, or you might even locked into a particular solution even early on. So you make it really clear that, you've got this. Then you step back and then you actually spend time observing, maybe 4, 5, 6 people. The more the better, really. But
of course, yeah.
You start observing what they're doing. There's a lot of different approaches. So you can you can actually just observe what they're doing in their natural environment. You could then bring in people in a lab environment and actually get them to interact with a particular problem space. You can actually go into the spaces where they're using the device or whatever the problem is. So
where do you find them more comfortable? Is it generally in their place that they're always in? Is that better results? Yeah.
It's better to actually be in their environment. So you're actually seeing how they're actually interacting with the problem or with others, or how they get interrupted by other people, because what you're doing is actually identifying a whole raft of opportunities that you might want to explore, and you're really trying to understand what's going on. The other thing that you could do is there could be an element of observation, but there could also be an element of actually getting your customers or participants to actually undertake a series of tasks. So you could actually get them to so that's where user testing comes in. So you could actually get them to run through a whole series of scenarios and actually test and observe what they're doing. So you might actually want to record those kinds of things. You might want to capture comments that people are making. So you actually might create a bit of a discussion guide or an interview guide or an observation guide, which we tend to do anyway. So that the reason we do that is so that you're asking and looking for the same things. But it's not a strict guide. It's just a
structured way of questioning.
So we tend to use a semi-structured approach. So we have the things that, and that's why uncovering those assumptions or biases up front is really important, because what you do is you build that into the discussion guide, and you can actually test to see whether what you're assuming is actually correct, because you might be totally off.
You can be.
Or the real problem is actually not what you're looking at, but the real problem is actually something else altogether.
Yeah, get it.
Or there could be multiple things that are linking up to that problem, so you could be solving for one or two of those things. But a discussion guide's kind of useful. There is best practice in terms of how you structure conversations and questions, so there's an art to that as well. So you're not like a journalist where you ask leading questions. You actually keep it really scenario based and open, because really what you're doing is you are exploring, particularly when you're in that early problem
exploratory phase right now.
So if you're in that exploratory phase, you are asking open-ended questions. You are not really asking them like, do you like why, or do you like this solution, or or even ask leading questions like, what is it that you like about this solution? So
So frame a question that you might ask. So I've got a.
So tell me a little bit. Okay, so if the problem space is, how do I use this podcast equipment, and you want to design a better podcast system, you might then start off asking like, tell me about your experience. What was useful? What was not as useful? What made what? So you're just asking those kinds of questions like, tell me about this. I want to learn about that. What are your thoughts on this particular area? When was the last time that you used it? Tell me your experience, like from the beginning to the end. And then it's just asking those questions about, oh, that's interesting. Oh, you don't actually say you're interesting, but you say something like, okay, you said X. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, or can you expand?
It's the expanding more into
it. It's the expanding, or asking, why did that occur in that way, or what did you think about that, or. Yeah, so it's just constantly opening it up, and then I guess
does it become more emotional, more tactical that you're trying to get involved in? You're trying to understand how a person's associating emotionally to something, or is it just what do I do? Where do you think is the focus?
I think a conversational approach is really important. So when we train up people to do either exploratory research or go into people's homes or do user testing and that, it's all about building that rapport. The more comfortable you make that user, and this is where I was talking about the soft skills. The more comfortable that a user feels with you, they're going to be open and honest. So we often start that conversation with, this is a conversation. If you have any questions, feel free to,
Ask the question.
ask those questions. I'm really, interested in your open and honest feedback. I don't have a vested interest in the outcome per se. I'm just, wanting to learn more about this. And so you're actually asking their permission, and you're actually sort of setting the ground rules in the sense that it's a conversation. You're wanting to learn and observe. You might ask for their consent to actually conduct the interview, to record the interview.
Okay.
It's ideal to actually have a note taker there so that you can actually have someone actually physically note take.
Yeah, because you can't do everything at once, especially asking questions, trying to engage with
can't.
somebody and follow the train of thought. It becomes a bit challenging to take notes too.
And there's also a challenge about actually capturing verbatim. So we talk about not interpreting what people are saying. We're actually talking about actually capturing exactly what they're saying, and you leave the interpretation once you've done all the work with, you've spoken to a few people, so that you're not narrowing down or biasing what you're picking up. Or what can happen is you hear something that you like, and you start going down a rabbit. Particularly if it links to your baby or to your solution.
And that's a challenge that you're going to have.
And that's a bias.
How do you unbias something that is yours? So just, I'm in the middle of something, early days, I've got an idea, and it's very easy to lead people and ask those leading questions. What do you like about this? How would you use this? Does this make sense? And as soon as you start asking those questions, they say, yeah, it does. And you're going to get those answers that
and people want to please you. People want to please you. And that's why I was saying, like, it's really important for you, particularly if you've got an idea that you think might be a winner, to actually have it there and visible, so that you can see it there, so you feel assured that it's there, but then let go of that and then open up those conversations and really understand what exactly is the problem.
So do you frame it as your idea is the starting point, or the problem you're trying to solve is the starting point?
No, I wouldn't even. Or what I would do is sort of say, well, look, we're interested in how you might be using your podcast equipment.
No, from your perspective, personally.
From my perspective.
If I'm the person with the idea, the concept, how do I approach those conversations? Do I approach them from framing it with, all right, I have this idea that could be where I end up, or I have this problem that I need to explore and evolve and make sure it actually really is a problem for everybody else? Where should I start? Problem.
You always start with the problem. So if you wanted to test your concept, test your solution, I would actually explore the problem space first. So, so if your problem space was, trying to get the best quality podcast, or trying to deliver information to a whole raft of, new customers or whatever it is, I would actually explore that, like, I'll speak to customers about, how do you like to get information? What's the best way for you? What works? What doesn't work? What have you used in the past? What's been a great experience for you in the past? How do you want to know? When do you want to know this information? How do you want it delivered? At what times? So you'd be asking a whole raft of questions to sort of help you understand that experience. Then, if you actually do have a concept you want to talk about, then you say, okay, we have come up with this particular concept, and you might have a scenario. You might say, okay, this is the scenario. Can you now, can you show me how you would use this tool? And then it's being quiet, and you get
observing.
And there's a concept about think aloud, like speaking out aloud and thinking out aloud, and you get them to actually tell you. And you might have a whole series of questions, which is, what do you think? What do you think this process is for? Who does it, who does it serve? Can you tell me about, the various steps? What makes sense to you? What doesn't make sense to you? What's useful, not useful? And you're not leading anything. And you're not sort of saying, like, did you notice this excellent feature that I have created that will solve all your problems?
Get it.
You leave it up to them to explore it. So if they miss things, it's actually...
That's a good thing. You haven't designed it well enough for them to find.
That's right. And that's the sort of stuff that you want to be capturing. You want to know, because that means they're clues for you to say, oh yeah, that actually does need to be improved. if there's no appetite for
Yes.
the concept, you might then want to say, well, what could make this more useful for you?
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes what I do is actually get people to draw their ideas
Okay.
and then talk it through.
From a technology perspective, that
Yeah.
might be drawing wireframes. Is that what
Yeah, you
you're
can get them to draw wireframes or put words together.
Yep.
You can do it as a homework piece. I mean, there's a whole raft of different things. So it really depends on the stage that you're at as well. So if you're at the early concept stage...
Yeah, let's talk early concept.
So if you're talking early concept stage, you're wanting to... what we call generative or exploratory research. You're wanting to spend more time in actually understanding the problem space. You're not wanting to go into solution mode at all. Like, I think
So
that's...
if it's early, I've got this idea to solve this particular problem. I should be just exploring problem, not my solution at all.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, what you can do is spend that time, as I said,
Yes.
up front exploring. If there's concepts, you might want to actually design multiple concepts,
Yep.
not just the one, just to see what comes out. The other thing you could do is bring a whole group of people and they could actually design it
Yes.
for you and just see what does come out as well. So there's a whole raft of different methodologies that you could use. So
Okay. So how do you find the conversation when you're talking to somebody that has an idea and perceives they have the solution and just wants to design it? How do you lead them down this path to let's do some more exploratory research to make sure we're solving the right problem, have the right solution to that problem, even if that is the real problem? What do you do?
I listen, first of all.
Okay.
I listen to what they say. So I would say, okay, tell me what you know about the customer. Tell me what you know about this particular problem. What problem are you solving for? How did you validate that?
Yes.
What other forms of evidence do you have? And then it's looking at, well, what are you not sure about? What do we need to test? So it's actually just asking those kinds of questions. I think you kind of get a sense. You kind of get a sense of where the gaps are, but it's kind of good to actually make them visible as well.
Is it good to point them out, or is it better for the person that brings the concept to find them themselves? What do you think?
I think what happens is you can gently point
Gently.
where gaps are.
Yeah, okay.
The other thing you could do is if they actually have gone to the point of actually creating the concept, you can actually concept test it. So you bring in 6 people, customers. So you actually and recruitment is now kind of important. You don't invite your friends, your family, your girlfriend.
Because they're always going to give a good answer, right?
No. So what you're doing is if they know their customer, they will know the kind of demographics and that. You actually recruit for that kind of person.
Okay.
And they're not people that have already heard your idea many, many times or anything like that. They are your customer.
Clean.
Yeah, clean. And you actually invite them in and you actually create a whole like an interview guide with scenarios,
Okay.
or depending on whatever the product is, but you might create scenarios as to how you use it. You ask them the same set of questions.
Yep.
You open it up a little bit. So you start off being exploratory, get them to explain what the problem is, and then get them to look at your concept, and you get feedback in the same way that I described before, which is don't lead them, don't tell them this is great. Let them tell you what you think, because that's very eye-opening in some ways, because you might be spot on, which is great.
You just want that's the point,
or
right?
you might discover that you're probably 50% there, 60% there, and then have you thought about, then all of a sudden, you might come up with a whole raft of different opportunities, or you might have to pivot, or you might have to let go of your baby and start again. And by starting again, it's actually looking at that problem space and saying, well, and this is where ideation, we talk about this in the human-centered design sort of field about, bringing in a number of different people to ideate. So you could actually ideate with customers and actually come up with solutions. And then there's
ideation with customers. How does that play out in a room? Do you find bias from certain people, the loud person in the room? How do you manage that? Is the facilitator's role?
The facilitator's role.
Yeah, it's important. So if you're trying to do this on your own, what are some tips that you might have for people to control an environment like that? Because there's always someone that might lead the conversation, dominate it. What do you do?
If you're really worried about that, then you do it one-on-one.
One-on-one? All right, easier that way.
You don't need to do a group.
Okay.
But if you're trying to speed things up, then you could do it a group.
Okay.
But you could actually, do one-on-one, and you get people to, talk out aloud as to their concepts and that, because what you're really doing is you're not looking at that idea, you're actually looking at the way people are articulating that, and there might be a whole raft of different ideas that you mash together and then you test that.
Okay.
So, or if you get similarities in idea, then you kind of know that there's something in here because there's actually maybe potentially a need or a desire for that kind of thing. So yeah.
So do you see an advantage in the one-on-one, especially if you get a lot of correlation in what people are saying across 10 of them? Do you see that as an advantage, or do you prefer a group? What do you prefer?
We tend to do one-on-one kind of stuff, but then we do co-design sessions, so we can do the group. So in terms of those tips, the way that could work is you could actually, what we start off doing is templates where we have like a 16 by 16 square box, and we actually get people to, have basically create 16 different ideas, or as many ideas as you want individually. So we get people to work individually. And then we get people to share back what their ideas and concepts are, and then we might say, okay, next round of innovation or ideation would be, okay, I want you to develop, mash up your ideas and do another round of ideation. So you and individually as well. So you're
don't still driving individual ideas and concepts.
You're in a group, but you're still working that way.
Get it.
Yeah, so then they could be mashing it up, articulating their, sharing back their ideas and that, and then what we can do is put all those ideas up on the wall. We can get people to vote on them. So you could give them different coloured dots, for example.
Yeah, I've seen this process and done it ourselves.
So you could actually have the ones that they like, the ones that you can use voting for any purpose. So, ones that you think is going to be the most, easiest to achieve. It could be the most effective. It could be the one that, is probably the best idea, but not realistic yet. So you can
could be anything and any sort of question you frame it from.
Then what you can do is get people to work in groups on the most voted concepts. Or you can still get them to work 2 by 2. So there's different ways that you can do it. So you read the room in terms of dynamics. What we tend to do when
you don't want a brainstorming session of people just talking to each other about concepts. That's not the starting point.
You can do that. I mean, this is the whole thing.
Yeah.
There's no right or wrong, really. The purpose of the ideation.
What have you found in your experience that delivers faster, better results?
Okay. So there's a whole bunch of different approaches that we use, because sometimes we have a mix of internal stakeholders together with customers, and they work together. And
that will change the dynamic.
That changes the dynamic, but all of a sudden you've got the customer voice sitting there. So you might have a group of people that say, I want this solution in this way because I can. And the customer's voice is there saying, yeah, but that won't work. Have you thought about X or Z? And then it sort of waters down a lot of that sort of thinking. So ideation is also another way of actually just equalising voices. It's also another way of getting people to work together that normally don't work together. It's a great way of having a shared experience. Sometimes the biggest benefit is actually just getting people who normally won't talk to each other
in one room.
And so there's multiple benefits. So you might generate a whole host of ideas, but there's also benefits in people actually just working together. Ground rules is how you deal with a lot of those
ground rules.
Ground rules. So talking about everyone has an equal voice, about listening to what people say. There's no right or wrong answers. And then things like dot voting, or if you're really worried about powers and that, you could actually give the leaders in the room a different colour to the other people, so that when you actually dot voting, you can actually see where the leaders are versus the other people. And the other thing that you could do is say customers go up first and vote. Then, if there's junior people, you go up and vote. Or vote during your lunchtime.
So no one knows what you're voting for. So no one knows
what you're doing. So there's a whole raft of different strategies that you can employ to sort of water down those bigger, louder voices.
Yeah, very interesting.
If that's an issue.
It can be. And we all know there are certain people in the room that could dominate. So that's definitely a good tip in terms of if you're looking to do some strategy sessions and brainstorming sessions and ideation, really. Okay, so I'm at a problem stage. I'm trying to understand what it is. I've worked with and utilised, like how might we questions. Now,
Yep.
how does that come into your frame of reference and what you do?
How might we questions are brilliant because that's the ideation component. That's where you're actually exploring the problem space.
Yes.
So they are the they could be the starting point for coming up with a whole raft of different solutions. They are a problem or a starting point for actually designing research and that kind of thing. So how might we statements are they're a really powerful tool in actually just getting everyone to start on that problem space. And there's an art in how you create them as well.
Okay.
So you don't want to go too narrow. So too narrow would be, how might we create a podcast system which delivers the best sound quality and doesn't, make.
Well, a podcast is a solution.
Yeah,
and
but
it might not be a podcast.
Yeah, and so
right?
you might.
How might we deliver value to a big audience? Start there.
Yeah, but that's too broad.
Too broad.
What kind of value?
Yeah.
Who's the audience?
So define that value.
Yeah. So what you'd be wanting to do is saying, how might we deliver a certain quality of something for a type of audience member. So you're narrowing it down to that extent, but you're not saying how might we deliver this solution to this customer in this circumstance only. So that's too narrow. So it's giving you, because if it's too broad, you could go anywhere.
You can go anywhere, yeah. And it's like anything, if you don't have a box, at least some sort of box to work in, you kind of get a little bit lost in what your solutions would be.
The beauty of it all is you can reframe your how might we. You can refine it as you get new information, new feedback. You can actually
and
You
evolve
can
through
evolve
the feedback.
it. I mean that's the whole point. Is that it's fluid in the sense that you change things to as you get new information about the customer, and that you do refine that.
Okay, so let's put it out there. I come up with an idea and I invest all my time into this. I design some UIs that I think would work. I've got a solution defined. I'm jumping in and I'm going to find a development firm. What are some of the challenges this person may have in this context, considering that they've just basically designed a solution out of their head? And what sort of strategy would they take? Would you jump into some working with users, as you mentioned, and just talking through first, not your solution, but what are the problems? Is that the first step? And then guiding them into a solution that you've designed. Is that what you're recommending?
Okay, so if you've invested a whole bunch of time in a solution, you've got wireframes in the UI. Wow. You could,
because it happens.
So what you could do is
there's two cases that we get constantly within the frame that we work in. They either come in with this whole solution completely designed, have it thought through, and this is exactly what I want, or they come in with 2 or 3 words, and this is what I want to do, and this is the solution. How do I build this? Or tell me how to build it. Let's quote it, and it becomes an interesting conversation because generally they haven't thought through anything. Or they've thought through so much that you can't move them. Yeah. So there's 2 different approaches that we seem to find in the case that we work in.
Okay, so the first case scenario, they've created wireframes in the UI, and have they found the solution?
They believe they've got a solution. Yeah.
Okay, so you, as I mentioned before, you basically test it.
Yep.
Bring in as a minimum, you kind of want 6. The minimum for user testing is about 5 to 6.
Okay, it's less than I thought. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so
5 to 6.
5 to 6.
Yeah. And then
for robustness, depends on these segments, because what we tend to say is if you got one clear segment, then 5 to 6. But if you're covering 3 different potential customer groupings, then you might want to basically 6 for each one. So, But you might just and that's if you might have a primary and a secondary segment or a persona.
How does that work with different stakeholders and users? Is that 6 across each of the different types of users that interact with the platform, for example?
It depends on how different they behave.
Okay.
So the more similarities there are, then you can probably reduce that kind of number.
Get it. Like an example, I've got an administrative level of a platform compared to the actual users. They're very different, so you might want 6 in each.
Oh, then you'll need If you've got totally different behaviours, then 6 of that, or 5 to 6 of that one, 5 to 6 of that one.
Get it.
Yeah. So in that first case where you said they've pretty much created it, you test it. See what people say. So you
Get it.
start off with what the solution space, and get people to explain what happens and what their experience is, and so that you build in that exploratory phase. If you don't have time for that, you could basically set up like a half-hour user testing session where you don't get any of the thoughts and ideas as to what customers actually want. If you want to go down that path, like how that's happened, but you could actually just test the product. So you create a testing guide. You basically say, okay, we've created this. It's a prototype. There's bits and pieces that we know might not be working, but we're just trying to capture your feedback at this point in time. This is the scenario. Okay, can you tell me how tell me experiences?
Okay.
And you keep quiet. You let them talk to it, and then as they're doing it, you might.
So you want them to talk out loud as they're utilising it.
And they're using it, you're recording it, and you're talking out aloud, and get them to go through the process as much as possible without you interfering, and then go back saying, okay, can you tell me what your thoughts were at this point in time? The alternate way is you can actually ask questions as they're doing it. The only problem there potentially is that you could be biasing the results.
Get it.
So that's why I'm saying sometimes it's better just to let the customer run through the entire process, because then you're actually observing how they're actually interacting with your design. You're actually observing the bits where they might be hovering over. There might be a hesitation there. So what you do is you're taking down those notes. You're recording what they're doing. And then later down the track, say, okay, can you talk me through that process? I noticed that you were actually hesitating. If there's a feature that you created but they missed, did you notice this feature? And they might say, oh, God, I never noticed that. Or, yeah, I did, but it wasn't important.
Okay.
Or whatever it is, and just say, well, what's your thoughts on that? What's the...
So after the fact, you can't go back and obviously question.
You can go back and you can ask them, what was useful, what wasn't useful, what worked, what didn't work, what else could improve this, and then... if it's high fidelity, you can actually ask them about the language used, the tone.
High fidelity for everyone out there it's been fleshed out design in maybe a Photoshop, and it's a clean design that will be implemented. So
and seriously, you don't want to be testing at the high fidelity stage. You can't be wanting
probably too late.
Too
way
late.
too late.
You kind of really want to be doing it at the low fidelity stages and doing it multiple times. That's the ideal.
And the last thing you want to be doing is running it out to your current customers with an actual developed product. And I've seen that done before as well. And then that's just no going back from there. These are the product, and I spent...
Well, it's sunk cost as well.
It
and
is,
And I think this is the beauty of to my mind, UX design or human-centered design is that if you are open to actually what your customers really want, you'll save yourself a lot of heartache and time and effort and money.
And that's the important thing.
And I think that's the thing, because you are better off spending your money on researching and actually understanding really what your customers want, and then building out something but testing it as you go.
Yeah, and I think and it's that iterative and learning approach, because in essence, if you design a product out of your own head, and this is my solution to this problem, that may not be the best solution at all. If you go and build off the back of that and don't speak to anyone, you might be in for a hard ride, especially when you get to the end and you launch a product and nobody comes.
Correct.
So we don't. And the point of what we're doing this for is helping people to understand that we don't want to be doing that. We want to be investing at early stage, understand the problem, understanding the requirements of the product, what's important to a user, what do they care about. Let's not just build everything, because that's not generally going to solve the problem. And also what I found is from a feature and requirements perspective, you can probably cut out 50, 60, 70, 80% of it and still deliver what the customer needs. A lot of people get lost in trying to add so much to a product because they think, what if we just add this, and we just don't want to completely avoid that situation.
Simplicity is really important. Because people do get confused by many, many different features. And the features might be great, but combined, they are an overwhelming experience. And really what you're looking at is how does it solve the key problem? And then in terms of features, you could... you can bury someone in those things. And they might be all useful, but the point is if combined they actually create a really bad experience, then even the fundamental product won't be used. And you don't want that. You're actually better off focusing on one, two great features than 100 suboptimal ones,
Correct.
which you think addresses the actual customer problem, but it's such a clunky, like a hard process or product to use that you'll get overlooked. So you don't want that.
And you've invested so much into these 100 features. If you did 20, maybe you'd probably have a better likely chance of success.
I think so. Well, I mean, when you look at the products that are successful, it's because they're solving a problem for that solution. They're not trying to bury you with many, many things.
Not trying to be everything to everybody.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. Your other question related to, what happens if you have a problem space that you want to explore and you think there might be. So this is where.
And this was the other start of the question. So we've got the person with the UI, and I've developed and designed something. Now I have a person with an idea on the back of a napkin. They're very different, and that's generally where people can start, and they can jump in and try and build something quickly. Where do we push them to? Generally research. But how do you research something when you don't have much? You just got an idea. What do you do?
Once again, you start speaking to what you think are the customers, and you start uncovering more about the problem space. You're validating your assumption about the problem space because it might be real. It might not be real. They might actually give you other ideas as well. So it's being open about what's possible, and then it's basically wireframing or ideation. So you could actually, you can create a whole bunch of different concepts and test them with customers yet again, just to see what has legs. So it's actually just keeping for that you might only want to speak to 2-3 customers. Not the same ones, but but you might actually just keep it
early stage. Keep it
really simple. And what you're doing is working in low fidelity. So you are not building anything. You're using paper sketching because it's quick, fast. You could actually sticky tape things together. You can get the customers to actually do that, or draw bits and pieces, or so you could actually work in a really fluid and fast way.
It's iteratively and it's quick, and it doesn't cost you much to change something, right?
Paper. I think paper, like that whole concept of drawing. It's fast, it's quick. You can hash out different ideas. You can say, what about this? What about that? So you're capturing feedback, and then you're mashing up your ideas, and then it's that whole process of just learning quickly and fast and doing things fast. And then you could actually go then into the wireframing tools. Once again, test that, and as you're going up the fidelity scale, you could you can just keep building on things, but it's the testing.
So you don't need much technical knowledge to draw on a paper and a pen, or grab a paper and pen. So it's a good advantage to anyone out there of a concept, sketch something, put it on some paper. I think it's good advice because not many people do it, and if they do, they probably go too far sometimes. So
What we find also is that customers can get if something looks too polished. Or too near, like
they can nitpick, right?
Then there's two things that can. There's a few things that can happen. Sometimes customers then won't give you their true and honest feedback because it looks good. So there is a bias about something looks good. They think it works well.
Interesting.
And that's why as a practice, we tend to make everything lower fidelity.
Okay, lower fidelity.
We start lower fidelity because then they're more likely to rip apart. They're looking at the flow.
And you explain that to them,
Yeah, absolutely. But what you're doing is you're actually sense checking the desire for the product. You're actually sense checking the flow of the product. You're actually sense checking the way it works and the thinking, which is more important than the way it works.
Or looks even.
Ugly things can work really well. And that's the thing, because there are people. It's that whole attractive thing. Like people make concessions to things that are attractive. So you often get good-looking things, and people say, "Oh yeah, it's user-friendly," or it looks it works really well. But when they actually start using it, then you realise that
not quite right.
And that's why working at that lower fidelities is good, because also you get genuine feedback as to the idea, the concept, and the biggest thing is do not get too hooked on a particular idea or solution. Don't sell that idea to a benefactor as this is exactly how it's going to work. Okay. Because then you'll have to deliver it, and it might not actually be successful.
At the expectations they have.
So you're better off saying this is the problem space. This is the general direction.
Concept, general direction. What outcomes you're trying to get out of this?
And that whole idea of just being able to pivot is really important, because I think there's a certain bravery and honesty in saying, like, you know what, this is actually not going to deliver it. So we actually use the what is it called? The desirability, feasibility, and viability Venn diagram. Have you ever seen that?
Haven't, no. So,
yeah, so it's this really simple model to help us prioritize.
Three
ideas.
circles, I'm imagining.
Yeah, so and then it's like a Venn diagram.
Yeah.
And so in the middle is what's called the feasibility. So you always start with the user.
Yep.
So it's like what's feasible from the user perspective. If it's not usable, or if it's not actually wanted by your customer or users, you got no chance of it working. So that's the first circle.
It's not about building anything.
That's right. And then the next two bits is what's actually feasible. So this is like, what can you technically deliver? What's within what's within the constraints of your the current technology paradigm or that. So that's really the technology sphere. And then there's the other one, which is viability. Can you afford to? Do you have the budget to build it?
Yep.
Is it marketable? Is it viable?
Because your solution might cost you
benefit.
$10 million and it might not deliver the outcomes you expect.
Yeah, so you might solve a problem, but it's
Mm.
going to cost you $10 million to do it, and the actual benefit is zilch or
Yes.
X%. So you've got to look
never
at...
going to get a return.
That's why a lot of our work or prioritization in terms of which ideas we go ahead with sort of falls into that lens. So you can actually dot vote on those kinds of things. So you could bring in all your stakeholders and say, okay, we've got this idea, concept. We know the customers have this element, so you covered that off. And then you actually have really honest discussions about, what's viable, what's not. And if it's not viable, then you let it go and you go back to the problem space and say, okay, how might we create this, particular space within this budget constraint? So then you start ideating along those lines.
And that's important because you can have budget constraints and you can still design solutions to solve problems within a budget.
Yeah.
It's probably sometimes a good thing to have a budget in mind, and then you've got those constraints that you know of, rather than designing something you're never going to be able to build or deliver upon.
Yep.
Know your budget up front, and if you can solve the problem within the budget constraints, you're in a better place than you can solve the problem when you don't have the money, nowhere near the money to do it.
Well, you might actually deliver true innovation from that sense. I mean, that's the beauty of constraints and designing within them. So, you're actually creating something that's actually going to be different.
It pushes you to think differently. If you've got endless budget, you can build anything, which isn't always the best way to do it. You've seen all those startups that get massive amount of money and influx of cash, and then they blow up pretty quickly because they don't know how to spend it, and don't spend it wisely. But the bootstrap startup can spend years building something, and eventually it turns into a product that everyone loves. So it's very interesting how constraints can guide a product and guide the innovation as well.
Yeah, I think I mean, you can conduct research within reasonable budgets. I mean, I think investing in it is important, but I think if you're
what's a reasonable budget if I'm researching a product and an idea? What should I be looking to spend in this world, or even just a time budget? Like, how much time should I invest in this early stage strategy of designing the products, understanding their problems, working with customers?
It depends on. I think the more time you spend,
the better.
But you could basically, on a shoestring, pull in people that might be your customers. So if you're currently running a business, and if you've got a database of customers, you could actually bring them in. You could actually do the research in situ. You can do it that way, or and then in terms of incentives, you can give them a cash incentive.
Does cash incentive generally bring bias? You have to be conscious of that.
No, cash incentive is probably better than giving them your product. That's bias.
Okay.
So for example, when we work with clients, we tend to give the client would actually pay either we use a recruitment agency, but they either get points which converts to dollars or cash, or we give them a Visa card amount. And the incentive amount, I mean, you'll get a sense as to whether your customers are prepared to give you their time for free, which is great if that happens that way. But if not, you could always, start off with a $20 gift voucher, work your way up to $50, whatever it is. So I think the rule of thumb is basically for every minute it's $1. So that's
Okay, so that's
so for
doable.
20 minutes of their time, $20.
$20.
If it's $30. It depends on the segment as well. Like for our business customers or people in the health profession or like accountants, if they're getting $350 an hour,
Yes.
you've got to be thinking about
What they're earning.
Yeah,
because
yes.
you're taking an hour of their time.
Exactly,
They're going to expect $350 for that hour.
Yep,
Get
yep.
it. Makes
exactly.
sense.
So you might be wanting to
Yeah.
pay equal to that or a little bit more.
Yeah, get it. So
it depends on who.
But it's not
Yep.
going to be overly a massive expense if you're interviewing 6 people, but you're going to do this continuously. It's not
Yep.
something you're going to do once off either. So you're going to evolve. You're going to interview, evolve what you're designing,
Yeah.
come back, iterate, until you're at a point where everyone's comfortable. And that's the unknown. You don't know how many times you're going to need to do that. There's no perfect answer to that too.
I think when you're in
Yeah.
that problem space, you do want to be speaking to more people at the
Okay.
beginning bits if you can. Otherwise, you might be going through like 3, 4, 5 rounds, and then rounds of testing. So you might do the initial sort of exploratory research with many different customers, or as many as you can, just so that you're getting the different voices.
Okay.
So that's where the numbers it's probably better to go, the 12 or whatever it is. 10,
Okay.
yeah. So just so that you're getting a variety. And
But we're not talking hundreds of people. We don't need
no,
hundreds.
because in qualitative research, what we talk about there is saturation. So when you start hearing the same thing, so you have your interview guide, but when you start hearing the same sorts of respondents, you know that you've got saturation.
Okay.
But when you still are hearing different sort of concepts or ideas in terms of the problem space or understanding of what exactly is the problem, then it sort of signals that you might need to speak to a few more people until you get to the point where you've actually heard segment 1, segment 2, segment 3. So then you kind of have a sense of
And they're saying the same thing, or at least the same lines with the same thing.
So when you start hearing that, you kind of know that you've hit the mark. So for user testing, that's why we say 5 to 6, because I think by that stage, you start hearing the same things. If you're not hearing the same things, it means you might be better off just adding 2, 3 more people.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that could change the dynamic a little bit. Okay.
And that's why testing with 3 people or 2 people is not enough, because you might not get the patterns yet.
Okay, I understand.
But then, having said that, we've done some concept testing. No, we haven't. Oh no, I think there was one round where we did 3, and I know I was nervous about it, but it was early enough that all 3 kind of said the same thing.
Okay, good.
So you get a sense of it. But,
And if you had 3 that said all different things, then you've got to add more people to that.
But your budget is a combination of. It depends on whether you're recruiting yourself. So if you're recruiting, then you don't have to pay someone to actually ring up people, contact people, their time invested in, booking a meeting, rescheduling, finding people, so
and managing all that
so
process.
that expense it can build up. So and then handling the incentive payments and all that sort of stuff. The other thing that you need to think about your budget is, are you going to be paying people for their time to get their feedback? So that's an expense that you might want to think about. Consider as well. And then there's also the cost of traveling, or where's this research going to be happening? Are you going to bring them in, or so you got to have the right space for all that sort of stuff. Or if it's in their home, you might need to
Face to face always the best outcomes. Or
so we do face to face, but we then do research via Skype.
Yeah, okay.
You can do it interview, phone. Face to face is, to my mind, the gold star, only because you're actually seeing what people actually do. You're building up that rapport.
Okay.
And then
it's always better. Human touch is always better for everything.
Yeah, but Skype can work just as well. We do quite a bit of that. So, and it's great if you're working in a particular market that's you've got Queensland, rural. You can
cut the travel costs, right?
Yeah, you can cut the travel costs, because that's another element of the recruitment. It's the travel time, the costs. Like if you're having to, travel to somewhere, like if you got to get paid for an Uber, that's part of that expense as well.
Very interesting stuff. So, and I think to everyone out there listening, I think it's clear that we want to be doing some research, and it's probably less than you would think, because if someone says, let's go to user testing, how many do we need? Hundreds, thousands, but generally not in this case, that you don't really need that many. So I think that's good insight for people to take away from this. And then also design your questions. What do you recommend about just designing your questions? You mentioned open-ended questions. You mentioned basically not trying to lead people anywhere. So in that frame of reference, how many questions would I have? Or is it a bit guided by the problem I'm looking at? Or how long is too long, basically, what I'm looking for?
Time.
Okay.
I think that's the governing thing.
Yeah,
so
okay.
if you want to, if you're limited to 20 minutes, then you only ask a few questions.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and you could you create a test guide which will start off with, the introductory bits. So it's the warming up type questions, like, tell me a little bit about yourself, or, how did you get here today?
It's the rapport building stuff.
It's all the rapport building stuff. And then the next bit would be about, okay, tell me a little bit about your, in terms of the problem space, like, tell me a little bit about your role, tell me about your most recent experience for, the problem space, so you start uncovering that element, but it depends on whether you're wanting that initial upfront stuff. If you're going straight into user testing, then it could be just a whole series of tasks that test that product, because what you're trying to do is find the breakpoints, or trying to actually see what's working, what's not working, because that's the mindset that you want. Does this have legs or not?
Okay.
Yeah, you're not trying to find validation for my baby. You're trying to work what works, what doesn't work, what do I throw out, what do I keep?
And the advantage of that is, what do I end up with? What do I build? And hopefully I've thrown out all the stuff that I don't need. I'm building the right things, right, and developing those. So
that's right.
I think it's been a really good conversation just to learn about your headspace and what you go through as a researcher in this space, because you're really before we look at high fidelity stuff. You're really nowhere near what high fidelity is.
Oh, we test high fidelity too, because...
But you're not starting there, and you mentioned that. So
no.
High fidelity is what's the point of high fidelity then when you get to that point? Is it more around testing how people react to colours, buttons, etc.?
Language,
tone.
Okay.
It's a different type of testing.
Yeah, it's actually refining. So it's actually looking at the UI components.
Yeah, and the language in it.
And as you're working through these stages, really also you'll be wanting to work with developers, even at those early wireframe stages, because what we tend to do is, you might wireframe things up. It's good to actually speak to the technical, like the developer, saying, like, is this actually feasible? Can this be done?
Yeah, and that's the challenge. Anything can be developed, but
but to what extent?
To what extent?
And that's where the viability.
Cost and viability.
That's why there's that wonderful sort of mix of what's wanted by the customer, what's actually technically viable, and what is viable. What can you afford? What can't you?
Yeah.
So it's constantly keeping the lens across all three elements.
Yes.
As opposed to just looking at, the technical side, or without looking at the user, or just looking at, I can spend as much money as I want, but it's not technically possible, or it's not going to be wanted by the customer. So you kind of want to keep those three things in balance. It's an
interesting point, because I think we can probably lean in towards what we know. If I'm a technical person and developing a product, I'm going to start building something. If I'm more creative, visual, I might start designing something.
So depending on the phase of your, where you're up to. So, at that early sort of concept stuff, it's all about exploratory and understanding the problem space. Once you get to low fidelity prototyping, you're actually looking at, is the concept going to work? Is it really wanted? Is it solving the problem? Does the flow make sense? You're really looking at the structure of that design. And then you get into mid fidelity. So you start looking at, is the structure right? Does the user flows work? Is it still going to meet that customer need? Let's start building in the language and the tone. Let's test that. Let's look at the order of, the information and the steps. You start getting clues as to the way that what do customers want to see if it's an app or whatever it is. Like, does that button make sense in that spot? Is the language right for that button? So you start building out that, and then mid fidelity is looking at the colors, the user interaction, and you sort of by this stage you're refining, but you're also validating.
Okay.
So you're getting that. So that's what I mean. Like the research sort of changes in terms
As you
of,
go through
as
the
you go.
process. Yeah, okay, makes
And
sense.
even at the development, you know, you might be speaking it, but before you even launch it, you'd be wanting to test.
Of course.
Just to see that,
Yeah.
once again, it's...
Is there anything that needs to be...
But you
now
wouldn't-
it's functional.
yeah,
It's a
but
little bit different again.
Yeah, but by
Yeah.
this stage, you
You
don't
shouldn't
want...
have to be changing the whole thing.
No, you shouldn't be. You shouldn't be getting information like, I don't want to use this. I can't see the need for it.
Yeah.
Like, what have you done?
Yeah.
What's the point? Or if people say, oh, this would be really cool with this extra feature, you don't have to build it then, but it's at least something that you can put on your back.
Yeah, put in a roadmap and just
Yeah, that's
consider
right.
that,
Yeah.
validate it, understand what it means,
Yeah.
and then refine it as you go.
But by that stage, you don't want to be hearing things like,
Yeah.
it's great, or the classic that you hear, it's like, oh yeah, I can see people using this, but not me.
Not
Which
me.
yeah, and you hear that,
Yeah.
and when you hear that kind of
Yeah.
comment, it means I'm not using it. Yeah.
Now that there, now you mentioned you don't want, obviously you shouldn't be getting those answers. Now, throughout the journey, are we interviewing the same market segment or customer, but not the same people across the conversation?
Ideally,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'd
But you
imagine
can,
it could
you can
lead
bring
it.
in, you
Yeah.
can bring in,
Uh-huh.
you can bring in the same. So
Okay.
it's just better to have new voices in that mix.
Because it keeps
So best
evolving.
practice is you don't keep speaking to the same person because they might have already bought into a solution.
Okay.
So it's better.
And they're probably not going to add as much value to the solution when you get to
but
that.
then depends on the process. Like
Okay.
if they were in the early bits and you bring them at the end, you can actually capture their feedback.
Might be great putting everybody in at the end, I would imagine. At least
We don't tend to do that. We tend to
Okay.
speak to new customers
At the end again, every single time.
each and every time. But
Yeah.
there have been a few projects where there might be
Okay.
one or two that are the same.
I think it's a good takeaway for people to understand that because, I think if you take 6 people on a journey,
They become
yeah.
it's like Stockholm their syndrome. They start wanting to please you,
yes,
and you don't
okay.
want people to.
Yeah.
They're not there. You're wanting to please them, not for them to
Exactly.
please you. Because in the end, it's all about the customer. And
Okay.
yeah.
That's a very good takeaway. So,
Yeah.
how can people find out about Symplicit yourself? Where can they reach out if they want to ask any questions further around UX,
Oh, definitely.
UI? How can they find you?
Through LinkedIn.
Yeah,
Symplicit's also got a website.
Yeah, and I'll share out
Um,
those links
yeah.
when we share out the podcast. Thank you for coming in. I think that's given us quite a bit to think about, especially when we're in early stages
Yeah.
of product development. So if you're out there, non-tech, looking to build some technology, really dig in on the problems, understand what they are, work with your customers. And I think it's the biggest takeaway from today. Work with your customers, interview your customers, understand what your segments are. Probably that's a strategy before you actually go on this path as well. So thank you. Thanks again. Thanks for coming
You're
in.
welcome.
Thanks for joining us. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For giving me the opportunity.
No, I appreciate
Great.
it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.